Hey guys, tonight we are stepping away from the blue light of your screen and the persistent hum of the refrigerator. And we are finding ourselves standing at the threshold of a world that has already finished all its worrying. You are standing just outside the Dipolin Gate, the massive, double-arched entrance to ancient Athens. It is the golden hour, that specific moment when the sun stops being a tyrant and starts becoming a painter. The air here is different. It doesn't smell like exhaust or recycled office air. It smells of sun-baked limestone, the sharp, peppery kick of wild thyme, and the dry, honest scent of dust that has settled over 2.5 millennia. You feel the weight of your own body pressing down into the soles of your leather sandals. The ground beneath you is a mixture of packed earth and smooth river stones, worn down by millions of footsteps that came before yours. You aren't in a hurry. In fact, the very concept of a deadline feels like a strange, flickering dream you had once. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Feel that dry, warm Mediterranean air fill your lungs, carrying the faint, distant scent of salt from the Piraeus harbor miles away. Hold it for a moment, just feeling the stillness of the afternoon. Now, exhale slowly through your mouth, imagining that you are breathing out all the frantic energy of the modern day. Let it dissipate into the vast, open sky above the Attica plain. As you stand here, you reach out a hand and touch the surface of the gate's western tower. The stone is warm, not hot, but holding that deep, resonant heat that limestone gathers after a long day in the sun. It feels rough and pitted under your fingertips, a tactile history of wind, rain, and the casual brushes of passing soldiers and merchants. It's a solid sensation, something that hasn't moved in centuries and has no intention of moving now. It's comforting, in a detached sort of way, to lean against something so indifferent to your personal stresses. You look up at the sky. The blue is deepening, bruising into a soft violet at the edges of the horizon. The sun is a heavy, copper coin sinking toward the mountains in the west. You watch the shadows of the olive trees nearby stretch out across the road, long and thin, like dark fingers reaching for the city walls. The cicadas, which have been shouting all afternoon, are finally beginning to lower their volume, their rhythmic buzzing slowing down into a steady, hypnotic pulse. It's a low-frequency vibration that you can almost feel in your chest. Breathe in again, counting to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice how the air is beginning to cool just slightly as the light fades. Hold it. Now, exhale for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You feel your shoulders drop an inch. You didn't even realize you were holding them so high. To your left, the Ceramicus, the ancient cemetery, is beginning to disappear into the twilight. The tall, vertical grave markers, the stelae, stand like silent sentinels in the tall grass. You aren't bothered by them. They are just old stones, markers of lives that were lived, finished, and put to rest. There is a profound sense of completion here, Everything that needed to be done today has been done. The potters in the nearby district have closed their shops. The charcoal fires are being banked for the night. You can smell a hint of wood smoke now, a thin blue ribbon of scent drifting from a nearby hearth. It's the smell of domesticity, of the world winding down. You shift your weight, feeling the slight ache in your calves soften. You are perfectly supported by the earth. The Dipolin Gate is a masterpiece of defensive engineering, a double gate designed to trap intruders in a killing zone. But tonight, it's just a doorway. You look through the deep shadows of the inner archway toward the city. The road ahead, the Dromos, is wide and lined with statues and public buildings that are beginning to lose their sharp edges in the gathering gloom. The marble, which was blindingly white an hour ago, is now a soft, ghostly gray. You take another step forward, your sandals making a rhythmic scuff-hush sound on the dirt. Scuff, hush, scuff, hush. It's a slow pace. You have nowhere to be but here. The city of Athens isn't a map or a list of dates to you right now. It's just a physical space, a collection of stone and shadow and cooling air as the last sliver of the sun vanishes behind the hills. A gentle breeze picks up, moving through the dry grass with a sound like a long, drawn-out sigh. It brushes against your skin, carrying away the last of the day's heat. You feel a sense of heavy, pleasant lethargy beginning to settle over your limbs. Your eyelids feel a little heavier. The world is narrowing down to the sensation of your feet on the ground and the rhythmic cycle of your breath. Inhale the scent of the cooling earth. Exhale the need to do anything at all. You are standing at the edge of history, and it is very, very quiet. The walls are thick, the night is coming, and you are perfectly safe in the stillness of the ancient evening. You take one more look at the darkening sky, then turn your gaze toward the path that leads into the heart of the silent city. Your sandals make a soft, rhythmic scuffing sound against the heavy limestone slabs of the Panathenaic Way. The stone is still warm from the day's heat, radiating a gentle, dry warmth that rises to meet your ankles through your thin leather soles. This wide, diagonal artery was once the busiest thoroughfare in the city, the grand stage for the great processional. Yet now it rests in a deep, silver-hued slumber. You might notice that the paving stones beneath your feet are not perfectly smooth. They are etched with deep, intentional grooves. While history books focus on the grand parades of soldiers and dignitaries, they often overlook the practical necessity of these ruts, which acted as a sort of ancient traction system to keep heavy chariot wheels from sliding backward during the sudden autumn rains. It is a comforting thought, really, that even in a civilization of philosophy and high art, the inhabitants were deeply concerned with the simple physics of not slipping on a wet hill. You continue your slow progress, the scent of crushed wild thyme and drying sage drifting from the rocky verges of the path. The air is thick with the smell of sun-baked earth and the faint, metallic tang of the nearby smithies, now cold and silent for the night. To your left, a row of tall, rectangular stone pillars stands sentinel in the moonlight. These markers served as the city's navigational grid, a primitive but effective GPS that told a traveler exactly where the public space began and the private dwellings ended. Interestingly, these pillars were often used as unofficial bulletin boards where citizens would scratch mundane complaints or even lost and found notices into the stone. You run your fingers over a particularly rough patch of granite, wondering if you are touching a 2,000-year-old reminder about a missing goat or a poorly made pair of leather boots. The intimacy of these small human grievances makes the vastness of the history feel a bit more manageable, a bit more like a tired sigh at the end of a long day. The moonlight catches the pale marble of the buildings ahead, turning the city into a landscape of bone and shadow. You are walking toward the Agora, the central square that served as the beating heart of Athenian democracy and commerce. It is wide and open, a vacuum of sound that swallows the noise of your breathing. While the world remembers this space for the birth of complex political thought, the reality of the daily market was much more tactile and, frankly, a bit more colorful. If you were here during the day, you might have seen the city's public guards walking through the crowds with long ropes dipped in wet, red paint. They would use these ropes to herd the citizens toward the assembly grounds, marking any dawdlers with a crimson stripe on their clothes as a sign of public shame for being late to their civic duties. You look down at your own sleeve, half expecting to see a ghostly red smudge, but there is only the silver light and the deep, velvet dark of the shadows. The ground beneath you shifts slightly as the way begins its gentle ascent toward the higher ground. The incline is steady, a slow pull on your calves that feels grounding rather than tiring. You pass the site where the great textile workers would gather to weave the massive ceremonial tapestry that was carried through the streets once every 4 years. It took nearly a year to complete, a monumental task of patience and repetitive motion. There is a specific, dusty smell here, the scent of dry wool and lanolin that lingers in the cracks of the stone. It's a heavy, comforting aroma, like a thick blanket pulled up to your chin on a cold night. It is said that the weavers would often sing rhythmic, monotonous songs to pass the time, their voices blending into a drone that likely sounded much like the wind moving through the olive groves today. You let that imagined drone fill your ears, a low-frequency hum that vibrates softly in your chest. To your right, the silhouette of the stoa stretches out like a long, low ribcage against the sky. Its columns are spaced with a mathematical precision that is almost hypnotic to look at as you walk past. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm of the shadows falling across the path creates a visual metronome for your journey, while the stoa is celebrated for its architectural harmony and the philosophers who paced its length. The locals knew it better as the place where you could buy the most expensive imported fish sauce in the Mediterranean. There is something profoundly relaxing about the idea that this temple of logic and order was also a place where people argued over the price of fermented anchovies, the high and the low, the profound and the mundane, all resting together under the same blanket of night. You feel the weight of your own thoughts beginning to settle, sinking into the gaps between the paving stones, leaving your mind as clear and open as the moonlit square before you. The silence here is not empty. It is a dense, textured thing. It is the sound of thousands of years of footsteps having finally stopped. You notice a small, circular depression in one of the stones, likely worn down by the constant dripping of a water clock, or perhaps just the repetitive tapping of a bored merchant's staff over several decades. It is a perfect, smooth hollow, the size of a thumbprint. You imagine the millions of hours it took for water or wood to carve that tiny hole into the hard rock. Time, in this place, doesn't move in a straight line. It pools in the shadows and moves in slow, heavy circles. You find yourself matching your pace to that circular rhythm, each step a deliberate, heavy movement that anchors you to the cooling earth. As you reach the midpoint of the way, the view opens up, revealing the skeletal remains of the old law courts. Here, the air is even stiller, smelling of dry parchment, and the faint, sweet scent of the almond trees that grow nearby. The Athenians were obsessed with the law, but they were equally obsessed with the idea of leisure, which they didn't see as laziness, but as the essential state of a free mind. To them, the highest form of human activity was simply being still and observing the world. You take a long, slow breath, letting that ancient endorsement of stillness wash over you. There is no one to judge your progress, no red rope to hurry you along, and no assembly to attend. There is only the cool, silver road, the rhythmic scuff of your sandals, and the deep, heavy peace of a city that has been sleeping for 24 centuries. You are just a guest in its dream, walking softly through the echoes of a world that has already said everything it needed to say. The road widens, its narrow constraints falling away as you step into the vast, open lungs of the city. This is the Agora, the heart of Athens, though at this hour, the heart is beating so slowly you can barely feel the pulse. The smell of the city changes here. The scent of wood smoke from the residential quarters is replaced by the dry, mineral aroma of limestone and the faint, peppery tang of wild thyme growing between the cracks of the pavement. You are standing at the entrance, marked by the ancient hora, the boundary stones that served as the silent sentries of the marketplace. Most people know these stones defined the legal limits of the square, but they also served as a sort of civic filter if you had failed in your duties to your parents or had skipped out on your military service. Crossing this line was a criminal offense. You, however, have no such debts to pay, so you walk forward into the silver-washed expanse, your presence a soft, rhythmic intrusion on the dust. To your left, a grove of ancient olive trees stands like gnarled, silver-haired sentinels. Their leaves are small, stiff, and silver-backed, shimmering in the pale light like 1,000 tiny mirrors. These trees were the lifeblood of the city's economy, providing the oil that fueled the lamps and the calories that fueled the citizens. While it is common knowledge how essential they were to the Athenian diet, the state was so protective of these groves that they were classified as state property. Even the dead stumps of these trees, known as moriae, were monitored by a special committee. If you were caught uprooting a dead stump on your own land, the punishment could be as severe as permanent exile. You reach out and touch the bark of the nearest tree. It is surprisingly warm, holding onto the afternoon sun like a living battery. Its surface rough and deeply fissured like the skin of a very old, very wise elephant. You drift toward the long, shadowy silhouette of a stoa, a grand covered walkway supported by a forest of marble columns. These structures were the original multi-purpose shopping malls, providing shade for merchants and a dry place for politicians to argue. It's a bit ironic to think of these grand colonnades as centers of commerce. But the fishmongers here were notoriously the most aggressive businessmen in the city. There was a specific bronze bell that would ring when fresh fish arrived from the Piraeus harbor, and the sound would cause a literal stampede of hungry Athenians, often leaving the most famous philosophers in the middle of a sentence as their entire audience bolted for the sea bream. Now, the only sound is the soft, rhythmic click of your sandals on the limestone, a sound that seems to travel further than it should in this empty, open room of the city. Near the center of the square, you find the remains of the clepsydra, the great water clock in the daylight. This was the heartbeat of the legal system, ensuring that no lawyer could drone on forever during a trial. It worked on a simple principle of water dripping from one vessel to another, a literal countdown of liquid time. It's a bit amusing to think that in a city famous for its love of rhetoric and endless debate, they had to invent a machine specifically to shut people up. The Athenians even had a quirky habit of plugging the hole in the clock with wax during the reading of evidence or laws, effectively stopping time so the speaker wouldn't lose their precious, allotted minutes. You stand there for a moment in the damp air near the drain, enjoying the fact that for you, tonight, the clock has run out of water entirely, and there is no one left to argue. You look across the dusty expanse and imagine the Scythian archers, the city's public police force, who would patrol this area. These archers were actually state-owned slaves from the Black Sea region, and they had a rather peculiar way of herding citizens toward the political assemblies. They would carry a long rope dipped in fresh red dye and sweep it across the agora. If you were caught lingering in the marketplace, instead of attending to your civic duties, the red mark on your clothes would result in a fine. Tonight, there are no red ropes and no archers to move you along. The agora is the city's living room, but tonight it's a bedroom. The word agorazing didn't just mean to buy things. It meant to loiter, to exist in public, to pass the time. You are doing exactly that, loitering in the middle of a history that doesn't mind your presence. The shadows of the columns stretch out across the dust like long, dark fingers, pointing toward the hills that surround the city. You take a deep breath, the air tasting of dry grass and old stone, and you realize that even a place built for noise can learn how to be perfectly, beautifully silent. You step forward, leaving the harsh, white glare of the afternoon sun behind as you cross the threshold into the deep, rhythmic shadows of the Stoa of Atalos. The transition is immediate. The temperature drops several degrees, as if the building itself is exhaling a long, cool breath of limestone and history. This massive, two-story colonnade was a gift to the city from King Atalos II of Pergamon, a man who clearly understood that the best way to be remembered was to provide a place where people could shop without getting a sunburn. You run your hand along one of the outer columns and feel the fine, gritty texture of Pentelic marble. If you look closely at the stone in the dim light, you can see faint streaks of orange and gold. This is due to the high iron content in the local quarries, which causes the marble to slowly rust over the centuries, giving the entire structure a warm, honey-like glow that makes it feel less like a cold monument and more like a living thing. Your sandals click softly against the floor as you begin to walk the length of the lower level. To your left, a row of 45 Doric columns stands like a silent guard of honor. You notice something peculiar as you pass them: the fluting. Those vertical grooves carved into the stone doesn't start until about shoulder height. The bottom third of each column is perfectly smooth. This was a deliberate choice by the ancient architects, a bit of practical engineering to ensure that the constant stream of shoppers and philosophers wouldn't snag their expensive wool tunics on the sharp edges of the marble as they leaned against the pillars to gossip. It is a quiet reminder that even in a civilization obsessed with the golden ratio and eternal beauty, someone was worried about a loose thread in their laundry. To your right, the shadows deepen into a series of 21 square rooms. These were the high-end boutiques of the ancient world, where you might have traded your silver drachmae for imported silks, jars of salted fish, or perhaps a scroll of poetry that you'd never actually get around to reading. You stop in front of one of the empty doorways, the air inside smelling of damp earth and the faint, lingering sharpness of vinegar. In the height of the summer, the shopkeepers would often scrub these stone floors with a mixture of water and vinegar to keep the marble from staining and to discourage the local ants from exploring the inventory. You can almost hear the ghost of a merchant complaining about the rent, which was paid in small bronze coins called obols, many of which were so tiny that people often carried them inside their mouths to keep from losing them, a habit that surely made for some very muffled and metallic-tasting negotiations. You continue walking, the rhythm of the columns creating a strobe-like effect with the sunlight. The Stoa was the birthplace of Stoicism, the school of thought that suggests you should remain calm and indifferent to the chaos of the world. It is easy to see why they chose this place. The architecture forces a certain pace upon you. The sheer length of the hallway, stretching over 100 meters, encourages a slow, meditative stroll. You think of Zeno of Citium, the founder of the school, who used to pace this exact stretch of floor. He was a shipwrecked merchant who lost his entire fortune at sea before wandering into the Agora and deciding that perhaps material possessions weren't all they were cracked up to be. It is a comforting thought as you walk through this reconstructed shell that one of the world's most influential philosophies started because a man had a very bad day at sea and nowhere else to sit but in the shade of a porch. You find the stone staircase and ascend to the second floor, your legs feeling heavy and relaxed. The upper level is quieter, the air moving more freely through the slimmer, more delicate ionic columns. From here, you can look out over the entire Agora, seeing the way the various paths intersect like the veins of a leaf. The roof above you is a marvel of cedar and cypress beams, reconstructed with the same precision the ancients used. You notice a small, obscure detail near the rafters. The joints are held together not just by gravity, but by small lead plugs poured into the wood to prevent the tremors of the earth from shaking the structure apart. It is a hidden layer of protection, a secret handshake between the builder and the ground. The wind picks up slightly, carrying the scent of wild thyme from the distant hills and the dry, metallic tang of the city's dust. You lean against the upper railing, the marble cool against your forearms. You realize that while this place was built for commerce and noise, it has a way of absorbing sound. The voices of the people below are muffled, turned into a soft, indistinct hum that sounds like the buzzing of bees in a garden. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the stillness of the stone seep into your bones. The Stoa doesn't ask anything of you. It simply provides a frame for the sky and a shield against the heat. You feel a deep sense of detachment, a pleasant drifting sensation as the history of the place wraps around you like a heavy, velvet blanket. The shadows are growing longer now, stretching across the floor until they touch the far wall, signaling that the day is slowly, inevitably, folding itself away. You leave the low-lying dust of the market floor behind, your sandals finding purchase on the gentle incline of the Agoreos Kolonos. The air changes as you ascend. It is thinner, cooler, carrying the faint, metallic scent of sun-warmed iron and dry, crushed thyme. You look up at the Temple of Hephaestus, a structure so well preserved it feels less like a ruin and more like a sleeper waiting for a wake-up call that will never come, while the Parthenon on the high Acropolis has suffered the indignities of explosions and theft. This monument stands nearly intact, a testament to the sheer stubbornness of Pentelic marble. It is a curious thing to realize that the very roof over your head is largely original, a rarity in a world where time usually peels back the layers of history like an orange. You notice the slight, almost imperceptible bulge in the center of the columns, a trick of the eye called entasis, designed by architects who understood that perfectly straight lines would actually look bowed and weak to the human eye. It is a bit of ancient gaslighting, really, convincing your brain that the stone is standing taller and straighter than physics should allow. You reach out and rest a palm against one of the fluted Doric columns. The stone is surprisingly smooth, though it holds the heat of the afternoon like a slow-burning ember. There is a rhythmic quality to the spacing, a mathematical heartbeat that keeps the entire hill grounded. These pillars have watched the city change from a center of philosophy to a quiet provincial town and back again. Yet, they have not moved an inch. You might find it amusing that while we celebrate the grand aesthetics today, the ancient builders were actually quite obsessed with the mundane. They even carved tiny, hidden channels into the stone to ensure rainwater did not pool and stain the finish. It is like finding a high-end designer watch that also happens to be a very efficient, albeit heavy, egg timer. You breathe in the scent of the surrounding greenery, pomegranate trees, and low shrubs that have reclaimed the space where the metalworkers once stoked their fires, their hammers once providing the percussion for the city's daily life. As you walk along the shaded colonnade, your eyes drift upward to the friezes, where the shadows play across the carved stone. You see the depictions of great labors and heroic struggles, frozen in mid-motion. The sculptors were so meticulous that you can see the strain of the muscles and the tension in the calves of the figures, even though they are made of unyielding rock. It is a bit of a vanity project for the human form, an ancient gym membership immortalized in stone. Interestingly, while we see these as pristine, ghostly white today, they were once garishly bright, painted in vivid blues and deep reds that would probably make a modern interior designer faint. You imagine the ancient strollers squinting at the neon-bright legends above them, a stark contrast to the monochromatic peace you feel now as the sun begins its slow descent toward the horizon, turning the marble the color of aged parchment. You step away from the main structure to look down toward the area where the potters once lived and worked. The ground here is riddled with small, rectangular pits, the remains of ancient workshops where the earth was turned into art. You can almost feel the phantom heat of the kilns vibrating through the soles of your feet. These craftsmen did not just make jars. They made the technology of their time, and they built this monument as a tribute to the very act of making. It is a bit of a historical irony that the most complete building in the city was not built for a king or a conqueror. but as a nod to the people who got their hands dirty. You might notice the small, deliberate holes drilled into the pavement nearby. These were not for drainage, but were actually used by ancient children to play games with marbles and nuts. A reminder that even in the shadow of such overwhelming stone, life was always small, tactile, and playful. The silence here is heavy, the kind of quiet that feels like it has layers. You walk around to the eastern side, where the light hits the stone with a golden, honey-like hue. This building survived because it was useful. It was repurposed and renamed over the centuries, adapted to serve the needs of the living rather than being left to the elements. In the 19th century, it even served as a final resting place for travelers who did not fit into the local customs. Their names etched into the floorboards of history. It is a strange thought, isn't it? A monument to the forge, becoming a quiet dormitory for the wandering soul. You feel the weight of those centuries pressing gently against your shoulders, not as a burden, but as a comforting, heavy blanket. The marble feels like it is absorbing the noise of your thoughts, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling through the flutes of the columns. You take a seat on the weathered stone step of the stylobate, looking out over the agora below. From this height, the bustling market looks like a miniature world, a collection of toy houses and tiny paths. The Agoreos Kolonos Hill acts as a buffer, a natural barrier that keeps the frantic energy of the city at arm's length. You notice how the trees here seem to lean toward the temple, as if they too are trying to overhear the secrets whispered by the stone. There is a quirky detail in the way the blocks are joined. No mortar was used, only lead-coated iron clamps hidden deep within the marble. It is a secret skeleton that has kept the building standing through earthquakes and invasions alike. You find yourself tracing the faint lines where the blocks meet, marveling at the precision of men who worked with nothing but hand tools and a very high opinion of their own craftsmanship. The sky is turning a soft, bruised purple, and the orange glow on the columns is beginning to fade into a dusty gray. You feel a deep, rhythmic pulse in your chest that seems to match the spacing of the pillars. The air is growing heavy with the scent of damp earth and the cooling stone, a fragrance that speaks of permanence and the slow, inevitable passage of time. You realize that the temple does not just stand on the hill. It belongs to the hill, as much a part of the landscape as the olive trees and the stubborn weeds. There is a gentle sarcasm in the way the wind ruffles your hair, a reminder that while you are just passing through, this stone has seen it all and is not particularly impressed. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the image of the perfect, silent columns burn into your mind's eye, a blueprint for a quiet, undisturbed rest. Your breathing slows, mirroring the long, steady shadows that now cover the hill entirely. The metallic tang of the forge has long since evaporated, replaced by the cool, velvet touch of the approaching evening. You feel a sense of profound stillness, as if you are a statue yourself, carved from the same patient marble. The world below is dimming, the lights of the city flickering on like tiny, distant embers. But up here, everything is muted and soft. You are ready to move on, to follow the path as it winds back down toward the heart of the city. But for now, you simply exist in the space between the columns, a part of the architecture of the night. The transition from the solid hill to the drifting dreams of the city below feels natural. A slow slide into the dark, quiet corners of history. You step down from the rocky outcrop of the hill, your sandals making a rhythmic, hushing sound against the dry earth and loose pebbles. The air here, in the lower reaches of the agora, is a fraction warmer, held close to the ground by the heat-soaked stones of the day. You carry the stillness of the heights with you, a quiet passenger in your mind, as you approach a long, narrow silhouette that stretches across the darkness. This is the monument of the eponymous heroes, a structure that served as the beating heart of Athenian information, though now it rests in a state of dignified erosion. You reach out a hand, feeling the surface of the marble pedestal. It is surprisingly smooth in some places and pitted in others, like a map of a forgotten coastline. In the daylight, this was the city's primary public notice board, the central hub for the 10 tribes of Athens to learn their fate. It is a strange thought, isn't it, that before the convenience of a glass screen in your pocket, if you wanted to know if you were being sued or drafted into a war, you had to physically walk down here and squint at a piece of wood. Your fingers trace the edge of the long base, which spans nearly 16 meters, a distance that feels much longer when you are tracing it in the dark. While the 10 bronze statues that once stood atop this platform are long gone, melted down, or spirited away by the tides of time, their presence is still felt in the square depressions left in the stone. These 10 figures represented the legendary ancestors of the Athenian tribes, chosen by a centralized political lottery to give the citizens a sense of shared identity. It is a bit like being assigned a house in a boarding school, except your house determines your tax bracket and which specific section of the phalanx you'll be standing in when the spears start flying. Interestingly, while the statues were grand and imposing bronze works, the pedestals themselves were often repaired with whatever stone was lying around, leading to a patchwork of geological history beneath the feet of the bronze giants. You lean against the cool stone, the scent of parched grass and ancient dust rising to meet you. It is a dry, clean smell, the scent of history stripped of its messy living parts. In the center of the monument's long side, you can almost see the ghosts of the white-plastered wooden boards, known as leucomata, that were once attached here. These boards were the analog predecessors to your modern notifications, covered in a thin layer of gypsum that could be scraped clean and rewritten. It was a remarkably efficient system, provided you didn't mind your private legal troubles being plastered in a place where everyone from your butcher to your ex-mother-in-law could read them. A quirky detail of these boards was that the ink used was often a mix of soot and glue, which meant that a particularly heavy rainstorm could effectively grant a temporary stay of execution, or at least a very confusing afternoon for the city's lawyers. As you move slowly along the length of the monument, you think about Cleisthenes, the man who redesigned the social fabric of this city. He broke the old power of the wealthy clans by dividing the population into these 10 tribes based on where they lived: the coast, the city, or the inland hills. It was a brilliant, if somewhat bureaucratic, way to force people who had nothing in common to work together. You find a spot where the marble is particularly cold, perhaps shielded from the sun by a nearby wall during the day. The obscure genius of this tribal system was that it wasn't just for voting, it was for everything. Even the way you sat in the theater was determined by which hero's statue you were currently standing in front of. It's a comforting thought. In a way, having your place in the world literally carved into the stone of the city square. The silence of the night is heavy here, muffled by the surrounding ruins of the council house and the archives. You imagine the crowds that once gathered here, the low hum of voices as men searched for their names on the military draft lists. If your name appeared under your tribe's hero, you were expected to show up with your own shield and 3 days' worth of onions and salt meat. It's a far cry from the modern out-of-office reply. There is a specific kind of irony in the fact that these pedestals, once the site of such anxiety and civic duty, are now just a quiet place for a traveler to rest. You notice that the stone fence surrounding the monument has worn grooves in it, not from the weather, but from centuries of Athenian elbows leaning on the rails, while their owners gossiped about the very notices they were pretending to read. You pull your hand away from the marble, the chill lingering on your skin for a moment before the night air reclaims it. The monument is a long, low shadow now, a horizontal line in a world of vertical ruins. It's a reminder that even the most urgent news, the laws, the lawsuits, the calls to arms, eventually becomes a silent, weathered stone. The heroes whose names gave the tribes their identity are now just footnotes, their bronze bodies lost, leaving only the pedestals to hold up the weight of the dark sky. You find yourself smiling at the thought of a city run by a lottery, where your neighbor might be your comrade in arms, simply because you both happen to live near the same patch of olive trees. It's a messy, human way to build a world, and it feels right to leave it behind as you continue your walk, stepping away from the public record and back into the private shadows of the city. You step away from the glare of the open square and the tribal chatter behind you, feeling the temperature drop a noticeable few degrees as you move into the deep, elongated shadows cast by the buildings on the western edge of the agora. The transition is physical. The chaotic energy of the marketplace, with its shouting fishmongers and arguing philosophers, begins to muffle into a rhythmic, low-frequency hum. You are entering the administrative heart of the city, a place where the messy business of living is distilled into the orderly business of record-keeping. Your sandals click softly against the limestone paving, a sound that feels amplified in the sudden stillness. To your right, the old Bouleuterian stands like a silent sentinel, its weathered stones holding the weight of 1,000 decisions made in the heat of the moment. It is a boxy, unassuming structure from the outside, but you know that inside, the air is thick with the scent of cedarwood, and the faint, metallic tang of bronze tokens being shifted in wooden bowls. You walk toward the new Bouleuterian, a more modern marvel of acoustics and efficiency, tucked slightly back into the hillside. As you enter, the light shifts to a dusty amber, filtered through high, narrow openings. You find a seat on one of the tiered wooden benches, the grain of the timber pressing through your thin tunic. This is where the Council of 500 meets, a rotating body of citizens who prepare the agenda for the entire city. It is a mainstream fact that these 500 men are the ones who decide what the Great Assembly will even talk about, acting as the filter for the city's collective will. However, as you lean back and feel the smoothness of the bench, you consider the quirky reality of how they got here. These men weren't chosen for their charisma or their deep pockets, but by the sheer, blind luck of a machine. You can almost see the Claroterian in the corner, a tall stone slab with slots for nameplates and a tube for colored marbles. A black marble meant you went home to your farm. A white marble meant you spent the next year running a superpower. It is a system that assumes every citizen is equally capable, or perhaps equally incompetent. And there is something strangely comforting in that radical lack of hierarchy. The air in here is still, carrying the smell of beeswax used to coat the writing tablets. You imagine the sound of hundreds of styluses scratching against wax, a soft, persistent sound like the nibbling of 1,000 mice. This is the resting heartbeat of democracy, not a roar of triumph, but a quiet, bureaucratic pulse. You run your hand along the edge of the stone armrest, feeling a small chip in the marble where someone perhaps tapped a ring in boredom during a particularly long debate about grain imports. It is a reminder that history is made of long hours of waiting and the slow accumulation of consensus. Leaving the council chamber, you drift toward the adjacent building, the Metroon. While the world outside might view this as a place of quiet contemplation, you experience it as a sensory library of the city's soul. This is the Central Archive, the place where every law, every contract, and every decree is brought to be preserved. The smell here changes. It is no longer the scent of cedar and wax, but the dry, papery aroma of sun-bleached parchment and the slightly sweet, grassy scent of imported papyrus. It is a mainstream fact that the Metroon serves as the final authority on the law. If a decree isn't recorded here, it effectively doesn't exist. Yet, as you walk through the rows of shelving, you notice the quirky remnants of an older world before the city relied so heavily on these fragile sheets of reed and skin. The laws were carved into kiabes, triangular wooden pillars that could be rotated on an axis. You can almost feel the phantom weight of those wooden blocks. The way a citizen would reach out and spin the law to find the section on property damage or livestock theft. It was a tactile relationship with the rules of the world, a literal turning of the page that required the strength of one's arm. You find yourself standing before a stack of papyrus rolls, their edges frayed and dusty. You don't need to read the Greek script to feel the gravity of what they represent. These are the receipts of a civilization. There is a gentle sarcasm in the realization that while the marble statues of heroes might crumble and fall, these thin, brittle records of tax disputes and maritime insurance are what truly hold the city together. You reach out, your fingers hovering just inches from a scroll that might contain the very foundation of the city's judicial system. The air is cool and dry, perfectly calibrated to keep the past from rotting away. You take a deep breath, tasting the dust of a century of paperwork, and feel a profound sense of stillness. The city's heartbeat is steady here, protected by thick walls and the meticulous care of nameless clerks. You turn away from the archives, your footsteps silent on the packed earth floor, and prepare to step back out into the fading light of the afternoon, leaving the quiet archives to their eternal, dusty vigil. The transition back to the open air feels like waking from a dream of ink and stone. As the shadows of the city begin to stretch and merge into the coming dusk, the transition back to the open air feels like waking from a dream of ink and stone. As the shadows of the city begin to stretch and merge into the coming dusk, you step out onto the packed earth of the agora, where the heat of the day has finally surrendered to a creeping, violet chill. The bustling noise of the market has thinned into a rhythmic silence, broken only by the distant clatter of a wooden shutter or the soft, rhythmic scuff of your own sandals against the cooling ground. Your path leads you toward the southwest corner of the square, where a peculiar circular building stands like a silent sentinel against the deepening indigo of the Athenian sky. This is the Tholos, the beating heart of the city's administration that never truly sleeps, even when the rest of the world has tucked itself away for the night. You notice the way the starlight catches the curve of its white marble walls, making the structure appear almost luminous in the dark. It is known colloquially by the locals as the skias, or the umbrella, thanks to its distinctive conical roof that tapers upward into a sharp point. It is a whimsical architectural choice for a place of such serious business, looking very much like a giant sun hat discarded on the edge of the marketplace. You reach out and touch the exterior stone, which still holds a faint, ghostly memory of the afternoon sun. a lingering warmth that seeps into your fingertips and reminds you that the earth is slow to forget the day's fire. As you push through the heavy entrance, the atmosphere shifts instantly from the crisp, thin night air to a thick, comforting blanket of wood smoke and old wool. The central hearth crackles softly, casting long, dancing shadows that play across the curved interior walls. This is the eternal flame of the city, a civic necessity kept alive not by any mystical decree, but by the very practical need for a constant, reliable light in the darkness, while most of the city is lost to the void of the night. At least 1/3 of the 50 presiding officials, known as the Prytanes, are required by law to be here at all times. They are chosen by lot, a democratic gamble that means the man snoring softly on the couch next to you might have been a simple charcoal burner from the outskirts, or a wealthy olive merchant from the coast just a few weeks ago. They serve for a single Athenian month, a period of about 35 days known as a prytany, during which they are the executive heart of the government. You watch the flickering orange light illuminate their faces, softened by the heavy hand of sleep, and realize, with a dry smile, that for all the grand speeches delivered in the assembly, the city is actually run by tired men in a round room, huddled together in a high-stakes sleepover, waiting for an emergency that hopefully never comes. Along the inner perimeter of the room, you see the heavy chests and stone shelves where the city's standard weights and measures are kept. It is a bit ironic, isn't it? In this sanctuary of civic duty, the most guarded items are not gold or jewels, but the official bronze weights used to ensure that the fishmonger down the street isn't skimming a few drachmae off the top of your dinner. You see a bronze dry measure, a cylindrical vessel used for grain, sitting quietly in the shadows. It is marked with the official seal of the city, a tiny, embossed owl that seems to blink at you in the shifting firelight. These objects represent a very human kind of trust, one that is verified by heavy metal and cold stone. You run your hand over a lead weight, feeling its surprising density and the smooth, cold surface that contrasts sharply with the dry heat of the room. It is a tactile reminder that even in the middle of the night, the laws of the market are being watched over by these sleepy guardians. The scent of the room is complicated and dense, a mix of the sharp tang of watered-down wine, the earthy, lingering smell of boiled lentils, and the faint aroma of roasted meat. These men eat here together at the public's expense, a perk of the job that likely makes the 35 days of communal living and broken sleep a bit more bearable. To keep things orderly in this bureaucratic dormitory, they use small bronze tokens to record their presence and their meals, a touch of administrative fussiness that feels oddly modern. You can almost hear the faint, metallic clink of those tokens in a leather pouch as a watchman shifts his weight in his sleep. The furniture is simple, mostly wooden couches known as klini, draped in thick, scratchy blankets of undyed wool that have seen better days. There is a certain intimacy in seeing the leaders of a regional power reduced to the vulnerability of a nap. The roof above you is a masterpiece of geometry. The terracotta tiles are specially shaped like slices of a very large, very heavy pie, fitting together with a precision that keeps the winter rain out and the warmth of the hearth in. You look up into the dark rafters, where the smoke curls in lazy, hypnotic spirals before escaping through a small vent in the peak, carrying the city's quietest secrets out into the night air. You find a spot near the hearth, where the floor is paved with a simple but sturdy mosaic of smooth river pebbles. The warmth of the fire begins to seep through the thin soles of your sandals, grounding you in this quiet, circular world. The night watchman sitting by the door nods to you, his eyes heavy with the weight of the hour and the flickering light. He doesn't ask your business. In the tholos at midnight, the mere act of being present is enough of an explanation. You watch the embers pulse with a deep, rhythmic red, echoing the steady heartbeat of Athens itself. The flame is a constant, a steady pulse in a world of variables. It is a comforting thought as you prepare to leave the warmth of the umbrella and head back out into the silent streets, that someone is always awake. Someone is always watching the fire, and the scales of the city are always balanced, even in the dark. The transition back to the cool air outside is less of a shock now, as you carry the smell of the hearth in your clothes and the steady rhythm of the fire in your mind, ready to walk toward the final, softest shadows of the night. The transition back to the cool air outside is less of a shock now, as you carry the smell of the hearth in your clothes and the steady rhythm of the fire in your mind, ready to walk toward the final, softest shadows of the night. You move away from the lingering warmth of the Prytanean, your sandals making a soft, rhythmic scuff against the packed earth of the agora. The air here is different. It has lost the dry, biting edge of the wood smoke and replaced it with something heavy, damp, and profoundly alive. You follow the sound before you see the source, a low-frequency hum that vibrates in your chest, a chorus of liquid voices that grows louder with every step you take toward the southeast corner of the square. This is the Enikraunos, the nine-spouted fountain, the civic heart of Athenian hydration. You find yourself standing before a long, low structure of limestone, its surfaces smoothed by centuries of hands and the relentless, gentle friction of water. While most history books focus on the tyrant Pisistratos, who commissioned this massive public work in the 6th century BCE to win the favor of the common people, they often skip over the humble terracotta pipes hidden beneath your feet, which were painstakingly inscribed with individual letters by the potters to ensure the laborers laid them in the exact descending order required for gravity to do its silent work. You reach out a hand, letting your fingers brush against the cool, damp stone of the basin. The surface is slick with a thin layer of moss that feels like velvet under your touch. a soft green cushion that thrives in the perpetual mist. The smell here is intoxicatingly clean, the scent of wet stone and deep earth. That specific mineral tang that only comes from water that has traveled through miles of underground dark. You lean closer, watching the moonlight catch the silver threads of the 9 distinct streams pouring from the bronze spouts. These spouts are shaped like the heads of lions, their monets stylized and sharp, though the water has worn their fierce expressions into something more contemplative over the years. It is a mainstream fact that this fountain was the primary social hub for the city's women, who would congregate here with their heavy ceramic hydrii to gossip and work. But you find a quiet irony in the fact that the most sophisticated engineering in the city was dedicated to the simple act of filling a jar. Beneath the architectural grandeur, the joints of the pipes are sealed with molten lead, a quirky technical choice that the Greeks believed kept the water significantly colder than if it were traveling through an open stone channel, ensuring that even in the height of a sweltering Attic summer, the flow remained bracingly chilled. You step closer until the fine mist of the fountain settles on your skin like a veil of cold silk. The sound is not a singular roar, but a complex, polyphonic texture, 9 different heights, 9 different pressures, 9 different notes hitting the surface of the pool below. It is a natural, accidental orchestra. You close your eyes and try to isolate just one stream, the one furthest to the left. It has a hollow, percussive clink as it strikes a submerged stone, while the central spout produces a deeper, more resonant thrum, while the Enikraunos is celebrated as a masterpiece of archaic architecture. Few people realize that the engineers built cleaning eyes, or small, circular manholes, every few dozen yards along the aqueduct line, allowing workers to crawl down and manually scrub the silt from the clay pipes to keep the music of the water clear. You find yourself smiling at the thought of a lone Athenian worker, centuries ago, scrubbing a pipe in the dark, just so you could hear this specific, perfect chord tonight. The water looks black in the basin, a deep and restless mirror reflecting the stars and the jagged silhouette of the Acropolis above. You dip your hand into the flow, and the cold is so sudden it feels like a physical weight against your palm. It is a sharp, grounding sensation that pulls you deeper into the present moment. The water is surprisingly soft, a result of its long journey from the springs at the foot of Mount Hymettus, filtering through layers of limestone until it reached this very spot. You let the liquid spill over your wrists, feeling the pulse of the city's lifeblood. While it is common knowledge that this fountain was a marvel of the Pacistratid era, there is a lesser-known detail in the way the overflow was managed. The excess water didn't simply puddle in the dirt, but was channeled into the great drain of the Agora, a massive stone trench that used the fountain's constant runoff to flush the city's waste out toward the Kerameikos. It is a remarkably pragmatic system, a reminder that even in a city of philosophers and poets, the most important things are often the ones that keep the streets clean and the throat cool. You stand there for a long time, the rhythmic splashing acting as a metronome for your breathing. The sound is a constant, a white noise that drowns out the lingering echoes of the day's debates and the distant barking of a stray dog near the stoa. The stone under your hand is cold, the air is damp, and the world feels reduced to this single, nine-spouted melody. You realize that the fountain never truly sleeps. It is a machine of gravity and geometry that persists long after the last citizen has gone to bed. You pull your hand back, the skin tingling from the chill, and watch the droplets fall from your fingertips to rejoin the dark, swirling pool. The transition from the heavy stone of the fountain back to the open space of the agora feels like stepping from one dream into another. As you prepare to move toward the final, quietest corner of the city, where the water's song will eventually fade into the absolute silence of the deep night, you leave the fountain behind, the sound of splashing water receding into a rhythmic pulse that matches the steady pace of your heartbeat. Before you stands the Odeon of Agrippa, a massive structure that once dominated the central square of the agora like a mountain of carved stone. Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, the right-hand man of the first Roman emperor, commissioned this place around 15 BC as a grand gift to the people of Athens. You run your hand along the base of a weathered pillar, feeling the grit of centuries-old dust and the surprising warmth the stone has retained from the afternoon sun. It is a marvel to consider that the original roof was one of the most ambitious engineering feats of the ancient world, spanning 25 meters without a single interior column to support its weight. Most people assume ancient architecture was limited to cramped, supported spaces. But this was a cavernous, open void designed for the resonance of sound. You can almost smell the faint, lingering scent of the cedar wood that must have once lined that impossible ceiling. A dry, resinous perfume that has long since evaporated into the cooling night air. You step further into the auditorium, your sandals clicking softly against the marble floor with a sound that seems to hang in the air for a second too long. It is a vast, semicircular space designed to hold 1,000 souls, though tonight it holds only you and the long, slanted shadows cast by the moon. You notice the floor beneath you is a patchwork of colored marble, a mosaic that once shimmered with vibrant reds from Africa and deep greens from the Peloponnese. It is a quirky detail that many of these stones were likely imported at immense cost, a display of imperial reach that the average Athenian would have walked upon with a mix of awe and casual indifference. You find a seat on one of the lower tiers, the stone cool and smooth against the back of your legs. The marble is worn down into gentle hollows by the shifting weight of thousands of spectators who sat here long before you were a memory in the mind of the world. It feels like leaning against the very spine of history, a cold, unyielding support that demands you slow your breathing and simply exist in the stillness. Looking toward the stage, you see the colossal figures of tritons and giants standing guard in the silver light, their half-human forms emerging from the shadows. These figures are massive, their muscular torsos carved with such anatomical precision that you can see the tension in their stone sinews as they appear to strain under the weight of the architrave. It is a strange, somewhat ironic fact that these statues were actually salvaged and recycled from an earlier version of the building after the first roof collapsed under its own weight in the 2nd century. They are the ultimate survivors of architectural failure, repurposed and repositioned to hold up a smaller, humbler version of Agrippa's grand vision. You imagine the smell of damp stone and the salty, mineral tang of the earth that these tritons were meant to evoke. Though here, in the heart of the city, they are surrounded only by the dry, dusty scent of sun-baked ceramic. The moonlight catches the curve of a stone tail, making the marble look almost fluid, as if the giants might let out a long, stony sigh in their eternal vigil. You close your eyes and listen, trying to catch the phantom vibrations of a lyre that might still be trapped in the porous stone. In this space, music was not just a matter of entertainment. It was a mathematical certainty, governed by the laws of physics and proportion. The Greeks used specific musical modes, believing that the arrangement of notes could physically alter the balance of the human temperament, cooling a fevered mind or emboldening a weary heart. It is an obscure bit of ancient psychology, the idea that a certain melody could act as a literal tonic for the nervous system. You can almost hear the soft, metallic pluck of a bronze string, a sound that would have cut through the humid Athenian air like a silver needle. The scent of beeswax used to polish the wooden frames of the instruments seems to drift on the breeze, a sweet, heavy aroma that settles in your lungs and slows your pulse. The echoes here are long and slow, the sound bouncing off the curved walls and losing its sharp edges until it becomes a soft, humming blur in the back of your mind. The silence of the Odeon is heavy now, a physical weight that presses gently against your shoulders and coaxes your head to tilt back. After the roof finally gave way for the last time, the building was never fully restored to its former glory, becoming instead a skeletal lecture hall. It became a favorite haunt for wandering philosophers who preferred the deep, reliable shadows of the ruins to the blistering, chaotic heat of the open market. Outside, you find a certain comfort in the idea of these thinkers sitting exactly where you are, debating the nature of the physical world, while the sun moved in its slow, indifferent arc across the sky. The air here feels perfectly still, as if the wind itself is hesitant to disturb the layers of silence that have settled into the corners of the auditorium. You touch the edge of your stone seat, feeling a small, jagged chip in the marble, a tiny imperfection that has survived for 2,000 years. It is a grounding sensation, a reminder that even the grandest structures are ultimately made of simple, tactile things that crumble and endure in equal measure. You look up at the sky, framed by the jagged, broken edges of the remaining walls, which reach up like fingers grasping at the stars. The marble used for this facade was quarried from the nearby Mount Pentelicus, the same source that provided the stone for the great administrative buildings on the hill above. This particular marble contains trace amounts of iron, which gives the stone a faint, golden-orange hue that deepens with age and exposure to the elements. Even now, under the pale, monochromatic light of the moon, the marble doesn't look white. It looks like old bone, warm and deeply aged, glowing with an inner light that seems to defy the darkness. You breathe in the night air, which carries the faint, herbal scent of wild thyme and dry grass growing between the cracks of the paving stones. The transition from the bustling city outside to this silent chamber is profound. A sudden drop in pressure that leaves your ears ringing with the absence of noise. It is as if you have stepped out of the flow of time entirely into a pocket of the world where the only clock is the slow, silent rotation of the constellations above. As you prepare to leave this hollowed-out shell of ancient music, you realize that the acoustics of the space are still surprisingly sharp, even in ruin. There is a persistent observation among those who study these stones that the center of the stage remains a sweet spot where a single, low whisper can be heard clearly in the very back row of the gallery. You do not test it, for the silence of the night feels too precious to break with even the smallest vibration of your voice. Instead, you let your own breathing become the only sound in the auditorium, a slow, rhythmic tide that fills the empty space and then recedes. The city may have been sacked, and the building burned in the 3rd century, leaving it a charred skeleton of its former self. But the way the air sits in this bowl of stone remains unchanged. Your eyelids feel heavy now, the weight of the night pressing down on you like the thick marble slabs of the foundation. The echoes of the ancient lyres have faded into the deepest part of your subconscious, leaving behind only the quiet, cool embrace of the Athenian dark. As you turn to find the path once more, you feel the transition in the surface beneath your sandals, before your eyes, even register the change in the incline. The flat, dusty expanse of the market square gives way to the first rhythmic rises of the Panathenaic Way, a path that has felt the weight of millions of footsteps over the millennia. As you begin the ascent, the air shifts, losing the heavy, trapped heat of the lower city and taking on a sharper, cleaner edge. The scent of the night is dominated now by the Aleppo pines that line the slope, their needles releasing a sharp, medicinal tang that mingles with the sweeter, more somber perfume of the cypress trees. While these trees are iconic to the Mediterranean landscape, you might find it amusing to know that The ancient residents often used this very pine resin to seal their wine jars, giving the local vintage a turpentine kick that either cured a headache or ensured a much worse one by morning. You lean into the slope, your calves tightening with a pleasant, slow burn as you navigate the zigzagging ramps, a design choice specifically engineered so that heavy carts and weary travelers wouldn't find the grade too punishing on their way to the summit. The trees close in around you, their branches forming a dark, whispering canopy that filters the moonlight into flickering patterns across the stone. You reach out a hand to steady yourself against the trunk of a cypress, its bark feeling surprisingly cool and fibrous under your palm. Like weathered rope, the ancients were convinced that the scent of these specific trees possessed the power to heal the lungs, a botanical pharmacy standing silent in the dark. Your feet find purchase on the large, irregular paving stones, many of which were salvaged from older, ruined structures and laid down with a pragmatic lack of sentimentality. It is a strange thought to realize you are walking on the recycled history of the city, stepping on the discarded lintels and doorframes of a previous age to reach the heights of the current one. The path is wide here, designed for processions. Yet, in the silence of the night, it feels like a private corridor leading you upward, away from the chatter of the world below. As you climb higher, the great gateway, the Propylaea, begins to loom above you, a massive silhouette of Pentelic marble that seems to glow with its own internal light. This marble is famous for its high iron content, which causes it to weather into a warm, honey-colored patina over the centuries. Though tonight it looks like pale bone against the velvet sky, you notice the deep, rhythmic breathing of the wind as it whistles through the gaps in the masonry, a low-frequency hum that vibrates in your chest. If you look closely at the joints where the massive blocks meet, you might see the faint traces of the lead casing used to surround the iron clamps holding the structure together. The builders were clever enough to know that iron expands when it rusts, which would shatter the marble from the inside out. So they wrapped every metal joint in a soft, protective sleeve of lead to keep the stone whole. It is a quiet, hidden kindness performed by architects long dead, ensuring the mountain would remain standing for your arrival tonight. The incline steepens as you approach the monumental stairs, and you slow your pace, allowing your heartbeat to synchronize with the slow, steady rhythm of your steps. To your right, the sheer rock face of the Acropolis rises up, a natural fortress of limestone that has been reinforced by human hands. You pass by a small, unassuming crevice in the rock where a natural spring once flowed, known as the clepsydra in the local lore of the engineers. This spring was considered a water thief because its levels would mysteriously drop whenever the seasonal winds blew from the south, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. You can almost hear the faint, rhythmic drip of water echoing somewhere deep within the stone, a cool, metallic sound that punctuates the silence. The air here is damp and smells of wet moss and ancient dust, a sharp contrast to the dry, resinous air of the pine grove you just exited. You reach the upper terraces, where the monumental columns of the gateway stand like the legs of a sleeping giant. These columns are not the perfect cylinders they appear to be from a distance. They possess a subtle, intentional bulge known as entasis. This optical trick was designed to counteract the human eye's tendency to see straight lines as sagging or thin when viewed against the bright glare of the sky, by making the columns slightly fat. In the middle, the architects ensured they would look perfectly straight to your tired eyes. It is a gentle deception, a way of smoothing out the world to make it more palatable, much like the way sleep smooths out the jagged edges of your thoughts. You find yourself tracing the fluting of a fallen drum with your fingers, the marble feeling as smooth as silk where it has been polished by the wind, yet gritty with the fine dust of the mountain. The path narrows as you move through the shadows of the gateway, and for a moment, the sky is obscured by the massive ceiling beams above. You are walking through a forest of stone, where the silence is so profound, it feels like a physical weight on your shoulders. In the eras past, this passage was lined with so many bronze statues that a visitor could barely see the rock beneath their feet. A metallic wood of figures that would have hummed and vibrated in the heat of the day. One such figure was so immense that its bronze spear tip served as a lighthouse for sailors miles away at sea, catching the sun and guiding them home. Now, only the stone bases remain, cold and square, like the footings of a dream that has ended. You move past them, your footsteps muffled by the layer of fine sand that has gathered in the lee of the walls. Each step feeling lighter as you emerge onto the flat expanse of the summit. Before you lies the open plateau, a high island of stone floating in a sea of dark Athenian air. The scent of wild thyme and oregano, crushed under the feet of those who came before you, rises up to meet the cooling breeze. You pass a gnarled olive tree, its silver-green leaves shimmering like fish scales in the dim light. The wood of these trees is so incredibly dense that it will actually sink if placed in water while green. A stubborn, heavy life form that refuses to float away. It stands as a silent witness to the resilience of the landscape, having survived fires and wars only to sprout again from the same ancient rootstock. You feel a similar sense of rootedness here, the height of the mountain providing a perspective that makes the worries of the lower city seem small and indistinct, like the flickering lamps of distant houses. Your limbs feel heavy now, the steady climb having drained the last of your restless energy. The marble beneath your feet is uneven, worn smooth in some places, and pitted in others, telling the story of thousands of years of exposure to the element. You find a spot where the stone is flat and wide, a natural bench overlooking the edge of the plateau. The wind here is steady, a soft, persistent brushing against your skin that smells of salt from the distant Saronic Gulf, and the cold, mineral scent of high places. You settle into the stillness, the vast, dark sky opening up above you, free of the clutter of the streets. The echoes of the climb fade into a rhythmic pulse in your ears, a slow, steady drumming that signals the end of the journey and the beginning of a deep, unshakable rest. You stand before the Propylaea, the monumental gateway that marks the threshold between the world of the mundane and the world of the monumental. The marble beneath your feet is polished smooth by millions of footsteps, a surface so slick it feels almost like ice under the silver glow of the moon. You feel the cool, dry air of the Attic night brushing against your skin, carrying the faint, briny scent of the Aegean Sea miles away. This massive entrance was designed to overwhelm the senses, a grand architectural handshake that left visitors breathless before they even reached the summit. Interestingly, the architect Nesicles was forced to leave the structure technically unfinished because the looming threat of the Peloponnesian War drained the city's coffers and patience. You run your hand along one of the massive Doric columns, feeling the sharp, crisp edges of the fluting, a stark contrast to the soft, velvety darkness that fills the spaces between them. As you pass through the central hall, your eyes are drawn upward to the coffered ceiling, where traces of deep blue pigment still cling to the stone like the memory of a dream. These ceilings were once adorned with gold leaf stars, a man-made sky to mirror the one you are currently standing under. You notice that the columns here are a mix of styles, with the sturdy Doric pillars outside giving way to the more slender, elegant Ionic ones inside. A bit of a stylistic flex by the builders to show they had mastered every trick in the book. There is a curious detail in the floor beneath you. It isn't perfectly flat, but slightly curved, a subtle hump designed to drain rainwater and prevent the heavy stones from looking like they were sagging under their own weight. You shift your weight, feeling the solidity of the earth through the layers of ancient stone, the silence of the Acropolis pressing in on you like a heavy wool blanket. Moving past the gateway, the Parthenon reveals itself, a massive, skeletal crown resting on the brow of the hill. It is larger than it appeared from below, a mountain of Pentelic marble that seems to glow with an internal, honey-colored light. This stone is unique because it contains a high concentration of iron, which oxidizes over centuries, turning the stark white rock into a warm, golden hue that feels more like organic matter than cold mineral. You walk toward the western facade, the sound of your footsteps muffled by the thin layer of dust that coats the ground. While everyone knows this structure as a pinnacle of architecture, it actually served for a long time as a massive, high-security treasury, a stone vault built to hold the city's vast reserves of silver bullion. You lean against a fallen block of marble, the stone still holding a ghost of the day's heat, and look up at the columns that lean ever so slightly inward. These columns are a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. If you were to extend the lines of these pillars miles into the sky, they would eventually meet at a single point, forming a giant, invisible pyramid over the city. The architects, Ictinos and Callicrates, knew that perfectly straight lines often look curved to the human eye. So they built the entire structure with subtle bulges and tilts to make it appear perfect to the observer. It is a building designed to lie to you, to correct the flaws of your own vision. You trace the curve of the stylobate, the platform the building sits on, and realize it bows upward in the middle by several inches. It's a bit of an architectural irony. To make something look flat and level, you have to build it crooked. The air here is still, the wind having died down to a mere whisper that whistles through the gaps in the stone like a low, hollow flute. You walk along the side of the sanctuary, the shadows of the columns stretching out across the floor like the fingers of a giant hand. The roof, long gone now, was originally made of thin slabs of Parian marble, a stone so translucent that it allowed a soft, diffused light to filter into the interior, even without windows. It must have felt like being inside a giant, glowing lantern, a stark contrast to the sharp, unforgiving shadows you are navigating now. You notice the small, square holes in the stone where bronze clamps once held the blocks together, sealed with molten lead to prevent the iron from rusting and cracking the marble. It is a testament to a level of craftsmanship that borders on the obsessive, a desire to build something that would outlast time itself. You feel a sense of profound smallness standing here, a tiny speck of consciousness wandering through a forest of petrified history. The scent of the night changes as you move toward the edge of the plateau, the dry dust of the ruins mixing with the smell of wild thyme and sage growing on the slopes below. The city of Athens is a carpet of dim lights stretching toward the horizon. But up here, you are insulated from the hum of modern life. You find a spot to sit on the steps of the treasury, the marble cool against your legs, and look up at the frieze that once wrapped around the inner building. While it looks like bone-white lace now, it was once painted in vibrant, almost garish shades of red, blue, and gold, a riot of color that would have looked quite different under the Mediterranean sun. It's a bit of a relief, honestly, that the colors have faded. The raw, honest texture of the stone is much better suited for the quiet, heavy stillness of the midnight hour. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the rhythmic pulse of the night. The Parthenon isn't just a building. It's a giant stone clock, marking the passage of centuries, with every shadow that moves across its face. You think about the workers who hauled these massive blocks up the steep slopes, using nothing but wooden rollers and sheer stubbornness, their hands likely as rough and calloused as the stone they shaped. There is a strange comfort in the weight of it all, the knowledge that these stones have sat here, unmoved, while empires rose and fell like the tide. air feels thicker now, more substantial, as if the history of the place is settling over you like a fine layer of silt. Your breathing slows, matching the deep, tectonic pace of the Acropolis, the ancient heart of the city beating in time with your own. The stars above seem to hang lower now, caught in the jagged teeth of the ruins. You feel the urge to lie back, to let the cold marble support your spine, and the vastness of the cosmos fill your vision. The journey through the city, the climb through the shadows, and the arrival at this high, silent sanctuary have all led to this moment of absolute stillness. The world below is a distant memory, a flicker of light in the dark, while here, under the watchful gaze of the marble giants, there is only the quiet, the cool stone, and the slow, steady pull of a deep and restorative sleep. You are a guest in a house of stone and starlight, and the night is finally ready to let you rest. You turn away from the grand, silent structures of the heights, your sandals finding a narrow, winding path that leads toward the hill of the Muses. The air here is different. It is thinner, cooler, carrying the sharp, medicinal scent of wild thyme and the heavy, sweet resin of Aleppo pines. You feel the change in the ground beneath your feet, the transition from the polished, unforgiving marble of the monuments to the ancient, dusty earth of the hillside. Each step is a soft thud, a rhythmic pulse that echoes the slowing beat of your own heart. The darkness is not a void here, but a thick indigo velvet that wraps around your shoulders, shielding you from the sharp edges of the world you left behind. You reach the crest of the hill, where the monument of Philippapos stands as a lonely sentinel against the starlit sky. You do not look at the stone for its history or its name, but for its stillness. You find a smooth, flat outcrop of limestone, still holding the faint, ghostly warmth of the sun that vanished hours ago. As you sit, the stone greets you with a solid, grounding presence. You lean back, resting your weight against the earth, and look out over the city of Athens. From this vantage point, the city is no longer a hive of commerce or a theater of debate. It is a tapestry of shadows and soft, amber flickers down in the agora. The fires in the braziers are dying down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the stoas. You can almost smell the distant, lingering scent of wood smoke and extinguished oil lamps, a faint, toasted aroma that signals the end of all labor. The white marble of the temples below has turned to silver under the moon's indifferent gaze, looking less like buildings and more like natural formations, as if the earth itself had grown these columns in a moment of quiet geometry. There is a profound peace in seeing the city like this, stripped of its noise, its politics, and its frantic movement. It is merely a collection of stones and sleeping breath, a physical manifestation of a collective rest. You watch a single light flicker out in a distant window, and then another. The darkness is reclaiming the streets, house by house, alleyway by alleyway. The wind brushes past your ears with the low, hushing sound, a soft sibilance that mimics the rustle of dry grass. It carries the coolness of the Aegean Sea, a damp, salty kiss that settles on your skin and makes you pull your cloak a little tighter. The fabric is rough against your chin, smelling of dry wool and the sun, a comforting, familiar weight that anchors you to the present moment. Your gaze drifts back to the Parthenon on its high perch. It sits there, a skeleton of logic and proportion, indifferent to the passage of centuries. You realize that the stone does not care if it is remembered. It only cares to be. There is a lesson in that stillness, a quiet permission for you to let go of the day's narratives and tomorrow's anxieties. The history of this place is not a burden you need to carry. It is simply the bed in which you are lying. The layers of time are like the layers of a heavy blanket, pressing down on you with a gentle, irresistible force. Your eyelids feel like leaden shutters, heavy and cool. Each time you blink, the world stays dark for a little longer, and the silver city below becomes a blur of soft light and gray shadow. The sounds of the night, the occasional chirp of a cricket, the distant groan of a shifting timber, the sigh of the wind through the pines, begin to merge into a single, monochromatic hum. It is a drone that vibrates in the back of your skull, a low-frequency lullaby that dissolves the boundaries between your body and the hillside. You are no longer a traveler, no longer an observer. You are becoming a part of the hill itself, as permanent and as quiet as the limestone and the roots. The oxygen you breathe is crisp and clean, filling your lungs with a lightness that contrasts with the delightful heaviness of your limbs. Your fingers graze the dry earth beside you, feeling the grit of the soil and the smoothness of a stray pebble, small details that ground you as your consciousness begins to drift upward, thinning out like the smoke from a dying fire. The city of Athens is sleeping now, a silent witness to the passage of time. The marble columns, the dusty paths, the olive groves, and the distant sea are all submerged in the deep, dark waters of the night. There is nothing left to see, nothing left to do, and nothing left to think. The logic of the day has surrendered to the intuition of the night. You feel a profound sense of safety in this anonymity, tucked away on a high hill where the air is pure and the stars are the only audience. The rhythm of your breathing is the only clock that matters now, a slow, steady tide that pulls you further away from the shore of wakefulness. The world is receding, the images of the Agora and the Acropolis fading into a soft, indistinct gray. The darkness is warm, inviting, and total. You are falling into the deep, restorative embrace of the earth, a guest in the house of the ages, finally granted the gift of absolute stillness. The stone is beneath you, the stars are above you, and the silence is within you. Sweet dreams.